Hello, everyone. How are we? Great, cool. Any questions? All right, that's the response I want. I want you to ask questions during this talk because it's more of a interactive, not really demo, but it's hard to do like slides with this. Anyway, hi, I'm Evan. If you've seen my talks before, I am very sorry. This is not going to be one of those talks. It will be slightly different. It'll be a bit more improv, so it's a learning experience for both of us. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Vitest considered harmful. Yeah. So what do I mean by that? Oh, don't look at that. It's not really Vitest considered harmful. It's kind of jest as well, but it's also not really jest. It's more like overloading Node is the problem here. And why am I talking about this? Well, it's because I'm at Constantinople. I've been there for about since last year, and as part of the platform team. And as part of the platform team, I've seen a lot of confusion around testing, and it's kind of fair because it's like a 2-year-old startup and they have growing pains, but they've raised 82 million, so we're doing well. And they're an all-in-one software for an operational platform for banks. And yeah, I want to thank them for giving me the time to come here and give the talk and write the talk and so forth. And also there's some of our engineers are here if you want to like say hi to them. They've got their hands up. You can talk to them. Our recruiter is here as well if you're interested. Yeah, we're very fun, as you can see. Anyways, so one of my goals of this talk, if you've used Vitest before, I think Jest also has the same. I haven't tested it, but let's just roll with it. I want you to kind of be like this, where you see like vi.mock and vi.spire, and you're like, ah, shit, which one? None of them are good. What do I do? As an overview, I'm going to have this like payments service like backend controller, and all of this is Node.js related. So if you're front end, you might see something that is interesting. But yeah, there's a payment service, a payment controller, payment store, etc. And here is the code. I might make that a bit bigger. Okay. Cool. All right. Can everyone see that? Awesome, cool. So here's our payments controller. The controller is like a, it talks to the server. And in the controller, there's this like get payment method, and it calls find payment, and find payment is from payment service, and it handles these events that come in as requests. And what is find payment? Find payment is in the payment service. And what it does is it gets all these payments from the store, and you just pretend that it's a database. And then it goes through all the payments and finds the one with the correct ID. And payments from store, it just returns them from a store. And what it does is I got to get rid of these annotations. It just has a timeout to simulate like talking to a real endpoint. Okay, are there any questions? Great, cool. Cool. So let's move on to mocking. So we have our payment controller, and now what we want to do is we want to test it, right? So I've written a test over here, and what does it do? It checks that you can get a payment, and so we have a test payment. And we have this vi.mock function. Has everyone used vi.mock before? No, some of you? Okay, cool. This is how I kind of learned to do things. And essentially what you do is you put in the path to your import, and then it will return an object, which is essentially the module. It lets you mock out the entire module. And we're essentially saying, when you go to find the payment, instead when you go to find the payment, instead return this value, right? And so that when we call this controller, it will get the payment. And I also have this cool extension here where you click this and it runs the tests for you. Isn't that cool? Okay. So this test passed. It's all good. There's some problems though. And one of them is that it has, they're kind of my notes, but you'll see more of them later. One of them is that there's no types here to kind of tell you what needs to happen or like what to put there. So if I put like, I don't know, get payment, it's like, I can put that there, but it's not, like what it's done is it's actually imported it. It's not really autocomplete, it's typed. Essentially, you can kind of do anything and it's very messy. Let me delete that because maybe that'll cause problems. Yeah, doesn't have types, doesn't have autocomplete. I think they added types, but still not quite there. It's also difficult to refactor because it uses this import string here. And so if you change the name of the service, my understanding is that it won't change either. And it doesn't care about the input of the controller. What do I mean by that? Well, maybe you haven't noticed, but these IDs are the same, and this one is different. So this test isn't actually correct. It doesn't work. The reason it works is because what we're doing is we're saying, run this function, take the input, and then when we call find payment, it doesn't matter what you call it with, just return some other input. And I think this is a terrible test because what are you actually testing, right? Awesome. Any questions? Yes.
Go back to the controller.
If I go back to the controller, oh.
Should have some kind of endpoint definition. I couldn't find it there.
Yes, good question. So this is the function that takes in some event, and the event holds the like request object, and then this is the handler that handles this event up here. And then this is actually used in this example stack where it routes the GET requests to this handler. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's not Express.js, it's standard notation.
No, I've just like rolled with, we use SST, so I've just rolled with like the example setup it has, and I've just played around with it. This part doesn't really matter. I just wanted something that works. But does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Any other questions? Cool, awesome. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that there's some issues with mock, but let's try and fix them. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new payment service method and see what new problems exist. So this is live coding for dummies like me. I just check out branches. It's very fun. Okay, so in the controller, that's the test. I've now added this get payments endpoint, and get payments calls get all payments, and essentially it just returns all the payments. It's just an example. What does that look like in tests? I have this new test and it checks that it gets all the payments via mocking. And I have some expected payments, and now I use the mock again and I have it return my module and I mock out the get all payments method. Does that make sense so far? Okay, cool. Let's run this. It fails. Why does it fail? That's a very good question. I had to think about this for a while. I've spent too many hours debugging Vitest and it's not fun. So I'm going to distill it down to you as best I can. And that is that the way that vi.mock works is it doesn't actually run within your code. What happens is Vitest will run the file by itself and look for any Vitest objects and then run them before your code runs and then run your code. So what does that look like? Well, it'd be the same as copying this vi.mock and putting it up here, and then taking this one down here and putting it up here, just format it. So this is what's actually happening. And you'll see now what's happening is that what we're actually doing is we're overriding this previous mock. And so when we get to this test, when it goes to run the payment controller, that module now no longer has the mock for find payments. It only has a mock for get all payments. Does that make sense? Is that confusing? Like as a concept, not what I'm saying? Okay, great. Cool. Yes, so it fails because there's missing method in mock. They're run by Vitest before. Effectively, all these mocks are hoisted to the top. If you've used JavaScript, hoists like takes it to the top. What this also means is that they don't have the test's context. So what do I mean by that? If I undo, did I undo enough? Okay, great. You'll see in this mock, we're like giving it this array object, and we have the same array object over here. You might be saying, okay, why don't I just return expected payments? And this will fail. I can find, oh, sometimes it bugs out. This will still fail. Actually, yeah, it fails because it says, expected payments doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because it's hoisted at the top. Yeah, and so essentially what Vitest is doing is it monkey patches the import to return something else before your code actually runs. Cool. Any questions? Monkey patching, good question. Monkey patching is a term for like, you have an object and that runtime, you change what that object does by patching it with different code. Okay, I hope I explained that right. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Before you mentioned how the string.
Yeah.
Is there a version where you can actually?
Yes, sort of. Essentially, you would have to create your mocked function to be a real function that looks at the argument and then like does the logic that your normal code would be actually doing. At which point, are you testing? I don't know, right? Like, cool. Any other questions?
So that line,
Yeah.
you said last mock overrides the first mock,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Is it the line clarify extendable and
So you're asking if whether I can.
one mock at multiple methods?
Oh. Yes. My code is gone. Yes, you can do something like find payments, vi.function, etc. But you can imagine doing that every single test can be quite frustrating. And you might see, we'll see how to solve this in the next one. Okay. Yes. Okay. So I think I should do the code before the slides. Okay. So here we have our mock at the top. Because if we're going to define these like functions, we can do it right at the top and not have to do it multiple times. And you'll see what we've done to get around this problem where you can't like put in your own value for each test because it's hoisted. Vi has this construct called vi.hoisted, and it lets you create a variable that you can access within Vitest and also within your test. And so we set up this mock to return this hoisted variable instead. And then in the test itself, we use that hoisted variable and tell it and mutate it to return that test payment. Does that make sense? It's okay if it doesn't, because I think this is terrible. It's really confusing, right? Yes.
quickly just leave out the wasted bit.
Put the Vitest function here.
Sign mock find parent is it.
Like this one. Like that. And then get rid of these.
No, keep those, but instead of having a with.
Uh-oh, sorry, I've done something. Oh, make these vi.fn. Ooh, good question. Let's find out. I love live coding. No. Yeah, we learn new things every day, right? And this is part of the point, right? Like this is just a very confusing thing to get your head around. And what's also difficult is that it doesn't allow you to like write a helper to fix this. And so even if you were to go ahead with this approach and you just told everyone, import this function at the top of all your tests, you can't do that because Vitest is expecting the top level Vi objects to be there when it runs your file, not extra functions. I will say I didn't write the framework, so I'm just piecing together my understandings. Okay. Yes, it's complicated, not great, can't use helper functions. Cool. Any other questions? Thank you for asking questions, by the way. Yes. Yes. Good question. The framework writers probably had something in their mind. And to my understanding, I'm not blaming the framework. I don't think there's anything wrong with the framework. My understanding is that this framework was made for JavaScript, and JavaScript is a web-based event-driven language. And what I'm trying to do here is write like back-end components. And it wasn't really thought with this in mind because, I mean, I'm not like a web dev, but my understanding is that if you're writing front-end components and so forth, what you want to do is you want to mock out the functions, right? And you want to change things for specific cases. But when you're writing a backend, you want to minimize as many side effects as you can. And this doesn't help. I'm not sure, right? But that's my understanding. Does that answer your question?
Have to use it or
Vitest.
yeah, or you have to use it in your project.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like Jest and Node also have the same mocking issues. And my understanding also is that Vitest is just the leading testing framework for JavaScript. Again, not 100% sure, I'm not a web dev. Maybe there's other approaches of doing it, but this is just what we're using at the moment. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we can talk afterwards and you can enlighten me. Cool. Okay. So there's another way of doing this, and that is to use this thing called mock. And now what we do here instead is we import vi.mock. We use vi.mock, but we don't actually specify a factory to tell it what, go away. We don't specify a factory to tell it what exactly to return. And when you do that, what it will do is it will automatically mock everything for you according to some algorithm that you can read up on in the docs. Okay, so if we do that, what do we do instead? We use this vi.mocked method. And what we tell it is we give it the find payment function, and then we say just mock the resolved value. And if we run these tests, everything's good and green and everything's happy. The thing to note here is that it's kind of tricking you in that this vi.mocked function doesn't actually do anything. All it does is it tells TypeScript that this type of find payment is a mocked type and lets you do this typing. So if I did something like find payment dot mock resolved value, you'll see we get a type error because it doesn't exist. But if I run the code, everything works fine. And that's because vi.mock, again, is monkey patching those objects within the module. And then before we even import the module, and when we go to import the module up here, we take that find payment object that's been mocked, and then we just call mock result value on it, and now it lets us do some mocking. And again, it's quite difficult to grasp your head around this. And there's some more problems, which I'm sure I've put on this slide. Yes, so you can import the objects, mock the return values, mocked isn't needed. And it doesn't make it obvious that these mock objects are being mutated. So every time I call mock resolved value on this find payment, it's changing that mock. And now in a future test, it will do something else. And we'll see more of that later. And also these mock objects are shared between all the tests in the file. And so you have very little test isolation unless you set things up right. The other thing is that, sorry if I'm going a bit back and forth. The other thing is that to do this, you have to import the find payment import yourself. And that can cause side effects because you're importing the actual code. Although now that I think about it, I'm not 100% sure. But I think that's perfect for this talk because I'm not 100% sure about anything. Cool. So are there any questions? Yes. Yes. Right. So the question is, I'm kind of trying to do unit tests in the controller, but instead I should be doing the unit tests in the service. And maybe the problem is the way that I'm testing. Is that correct? Yes, you're spot on. This is one of the key things. And I believe the next slide will, in a couple slides, we'll get to it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to, I don't know if this is called namespacing, but in the payment service, I don't know. I was reading this code and I'm like, this is kind of confusing. We have find payment, we have get payment. Why don't we make it look like this so it's a bit more understandable where that function is coming from? And I understand that you can like do like as, etc. But we're kind of used to doing this instead, which is, let me just check it out instead. Not the hash, thanks. Cool. So instead, we'll do something like this, where we say, export all of these methods from the module as this payment service object. And now in the payment controller, I can do something like payment service.find payment. Does that make sense? Okay. I don't know if this is like ideal, but let's roll with it. And if we run the tests, spoiler alert, they fail. And they fail in this really weird way that took me forever to figure out why, until I was setting this up and I'm like, huh. And this will make more sense once the test actually fails. There you go. And you'll see what it says is that it ran out of memory. And I'm like, why did the test run out of memory? And then you look up a bit more and it's like, it reached the memory limit. And I was like, why would it reach the memory limit? It's like, I guess it's like doing something recursively. I don't really understand. I tried to debug it and figuring out, and it's like, it's not our code, I think, but maybe it is. But essentially what I eventually figured out is that doing this export statement just completely breaks vi.mock if you don't specify like a factory method for some reason. I think this is a bug. I may be convinced otherwise. I don't know, but this was really confusing when I was trying to like set things up and yes. Any questions? I think it doesn't. That's a good question. So import, is it like this? It doesn't, no. So there is that to consider. But it's also like, you know, maybe you've been using export star in all of your code, and now you're suddenly doing these testing things, and you're like, why is it breaking? I don't know. So this is probably how to do it, but I'm not convinced that this like export star feature is not a bug. So I need to talk to Vitest about that. Or you do it. It will happen eventually. Okay, so yes, I think at the end of this, I'm like, vi.mock, too bloody confusing. I don't want to touch it anymore. More rants on my slide. Okay, so what do we want to do next? Let's try spies. Has anyone used vi.spy on? Cool. Yes. Awesome. Wait, does anyone test? Who doesn't? Okay, cool. Some more hands up. Okay, so let's look at vi.spy on. And it's kind of similar to mock. And instead, what we do is we say spy on the payment service and use the find, like spy the find payment method and mock that result value as test payment. Does that make sense so far? Not really. But it works. Essentially what vi.spy on is doing is it takes this payment service object that you've imported and it monkey patches the specific method that you want to test for. So it's kind of like mock, but more specific. Any questions? Yes. I feel like your talk is going to cover that. Cool. No, and I will get to that. There's plenty of gold in this, don't worry. Okay, so the last thing I want to say here is that this is also weird. It has to kind of take in the string for the method. You can't give it the method itself. And like it's okay because it doesn't have typing on it, which is nice. So if I like get rid of this, yeah, gives me the things, and if I make it wrong, it'll complain. So that's nice. But again, if you're gonna go refactor it, at least VS Code doesn't have that understanding that this string is actually also a method attached to this object. So it's just not going to. I learned this the hard way when trying to change this up a bit. Cool. So to answer your question, let's test the payment service instead, right? So maybe our actual problem is we're not doing our tests right. So we have this payment controller test. It works for spies. Everything's all in good. I think it's pretty clean. Let's go to this payment service test. And as a reminder, let's go to payment service. And payment service is just two functions, finds a payment, gets all payments. And the main thing that we want to mock out here is this payment store dependency, because if you remember, it does this like timeout, and we want our tests to be fast, right? So what does this payment service test look like? Let's get rid of some of these. Cool. We have this describe block. And what we're saying is this spy on the payment store. We get payments from store and we mock the result value to be test payments. And if we run this, everything's all good. Any questions? Awesome. Cool. So this works, but I clearly said at the beginning that vi.spy was also bad as well. So why do I have that opinion? It's also worth noting here that in the same way with the vi.mocked, this payment store is also dependent on us importing this file. And when you import a file, it runs it. And if that file has side effects, your tests will now also have side effects. And I feel like we don't want side effects in tests. Does everyone agree? Okay, great, cool. Any questions? I'm just going to keep asking anyway. So don't be shy. That's a good point. Yes. Probably. Yes. Yes. Not 100% sure. We can test it later. Okay. So let's talk about test isolation because you're like not having side effects. If we go to the payment service test, I've now added a third method, which checks that the test payment is not in the real payments. And this test kind of asserts to us that we are actually mocking what we want to be mocking. And if I run this, it's actually going to fail. And wow, suddenly now this actual payment does contain the test payment. And why is that? It's because, as you had asked before, these vi.spy-ons are mutating this payment store object, and it's running like for the whole instance of the test, because again, this vi.spy-on is being hoisted to the top of the file on the same way that vi.mock is. And so down here, when we feel like we have our own isolated test context, we're actually still running in the same way as all the other tests before. And now suddenly this get all payments is returning these mocked payments, these test payments, when that shouldn't be the case. How do we fix this? Well, we can do before each. I think this is right. And then inside before each, we can do vi.reset all mocks. Okay, so if we run this, it actually still doesn't work. That's a good question. We probably also need after each. Still doesn't work. Sorry? Well, that's a good question, right? Like, can we just go with one or the other? And the answer is no, because let's say you mock something in one test, and then the test afterwards now doesn't mock it, and the test after that does mock it. Your first when you reset the mocks before each test, it'll capture it. Sorry. In this case, we want to reset the mocks before the test runs. But if it's if it's somewhere else, and it's like at the top of the file, we want to reset the mocks after each test runs. Yes, right. We want to mock each test every time, but vi.spy-on doesn't give us that ability, right? Because it does this hoisting thing. That's a good, like, yes, you can do that.
I would stick with the first option of monkey.
Sure, okay. And there's a lot of good differing opinions here, right? Like someone's saying, let's do this. Another person's saying, oh, that's terrible. It's like, you know, testing should not be this hard, right? Okay, let me move on. So yes, just like mock, spies mutate the object for the whole context of the test file, and more importantly, they mutate the real object. Vi.mock creates like a mock of the object and doesn't look at the real thing at all, whereas vi.spyon mutates the real one, and that's important on the next slide. But yes, if you care about your tests being isolated and you're going to go down this route, probably use vi.reset all mocks. And it is worth noting that Vitest does recommend this, but it's not super obvious, especially if you're coding. And if you do reset all mocks, keep in mind that it restores back to the original real implementation, as you saw with the like testing the real thing. Any questions? Yes. With different multiple files? I guess not. But if you want to be like devil's advocate, it's like, oh, if I have multiple files, now it's harder to read. And it's like, I don't know, depends who you ask. But I'm going to convince you why that doesn't actually change anything. So, and that is that it's very easy to have side effects even when you're using vi.spyon. It's a great rave outside. So what have I done? I'm going to run these tests now. And they're going to pass, but they're going to do some side effect stuff. And it's going to take really long to run. And that is because, so remember, these tests are passing, but under the hood in someone else's PR, in the payment service, I've now added this line from the payment store, and it's checking for fraudulent payments, right? And in this check for fraudulent payments, what are we doing? We're waiting like 4 seconds. Why 4 seconds? If you wait 5 seconds, Vitest will time out and freak out. But I hope that I've shown you here that like, even if you go and put them into multiple files, even if you do one over the other, you'll still have this problem where you're now no longer, like, you have no clue in your tests what you're actually testing, because the code underneath can change because your mocking doesn't actually check whether it's meant to, like, what it's actually running. Like for me to mock out this check for fraudulent payments, I would have to go in here and then also do a vi.spyon for check, give me some autocomplete. Anyway, you get the idea, right? Like, to me, I don't want to write code like this, because now suddenly my tests are going to pass or fail without me figuring out why. Yes. 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 Good point. Yes. So if the recording, if you didn't hear, one of the problems is that we're not really using dependency injection to like fix these problems. That is exactly right. So let's look into that. I'm not sure if it's the next slide. I have another 2 examples and then we'll get to that. So this is adding a new dependency. In this case, it's going to be a feature flags dependency. And what is this feature flags thing? Well, in the payments controller, we have this, the payments controller, sorry, this is the test. It's too many files. the payments controller has this get payment method. And in get payments, we've decided arbitrarily that we don't want to release this to the user. We want to block it and then release it all in one go after we're done developing. And how do we do that? We have this like feature flags object. You might have seen them before. Essentially, we're saying, check if this disabled flag isn't like, check if this flag value is enabled. If it is, continue. If it's disabled, then throw this error, right? You see there's this feature flags and feature flags. You don't really need to look into the details. I don't know why I'm showing you this. Maybe look at the interface, which is, there's a function, you give it a string, it returns a true or false. Okay. I think what I want to show you is that this feature flags is just defined at the top level. But now when we go to our payments controller test and we try and run them, they'll fail because the feature flag is disabled. And this isn't great because while we're developing, we want to test with this feature being enabled. So how do we fix this? Let's try spying on feature flags. And that is, what we'll do is we'll change the way we've written our feature flags to instead include this get instance method. And essentially it returns this singleton that constructs the object. And then in our payments controller test, I create this fake flags and I spy on the feature flags get instance method and tell it, hey, when you call this get instance, instead of returning the real instance, now return this fake flags object. And this works, which is great, but you can see there's like this red squiggly, and that's because Vitest doesn't understand, well, I'm not really sure why, but my understanding is that Vitest doesn't understand this concept of you have this interface, feature flags implements this flags interface, fake flags also implements this flag interface. So they're the same thing, and yet in the, why do my files keep disappearing? In the same thing, it's like, oh, suddenly the types are wrong, and now you have these type errors, right? That's a good question. Nothing. But I guess, yeah, we could do. Oh, there you go. Nice, thank you. Okay, so this kind of works. And the other thing you might be asking yourself is, why do we need this fake flags object? And that's because we want to be able to store like the values that we're putting in. Because let's say you have a test that has multiple feature flags. Some of them might be true, some of them might be false. You can't just say every time the feature flag dot is feature enabled method is called return true. Because now your tests will fail because some of those flags are true and some of those flags are false, and you'll be going into different branches than you expected. That's why it's important to have this thing. This isn't valid anymore. Cool. Okay. Any questions? All right. We're almost at the end. Cool. So to your comment down the back, what if we actually use dependency injection, right? And that's a really good point, because right now we can't go and change what the feature flag as instance is without mocking it out. So how are we going to do that? In this branch, what I've done is I've refactored all of the code, and now instead of being top-level functions, they're these classes that contain the methods and then also contain in the constructor these objects that you're depending on. Cool. And so now we can do a dependency injection because if I go to the payment controller tests, you can see that what I do instead is I do this vi.import mock. My understanding of this is that it will create it will create this like mocked object for you that you can then inject into your tests as this like prototype. And now if we run these tests, everything is all well and good. Does that make sense? Cool. It is a little bit finicky though, because you have to kind of tell it what the type is and you have to import the type, but also you have to like do this thing and I don't know. Cool. Any questions? That is a good question. Sorry, the question is, do you have to use .prototype? The answer is yes, because otherwise it has this type error and I don't understand it well enough to figure out why. All I know is I mucked around with it and this worked. Ooh, good question. Like this? I guess it needs this. But then at this point, it's like I'm constructing all the objects in my test. That's a good insight though. Someone can explain to me the intricacies of why this works. I'd love that. Yes, it is a little bit confusing, right? Anything else? Yeah, some of you might not like classes. I just learned using classes and they're understandable to me and every other language that has classes. But you can do dependency injection in however method you want. Point still stands though that this vi.import mock still has issues, and that is that it still has the same problem with vi.spyon in that it doesn't catch these methods that aren't set up to be mocked. Actually, it does it in a worse way because, you know, if we go to the payment service and we run these tests, this is these are not the tests. These are the tests. It runs fine and well, and it passes. But in the payment service, my tabs are disappearing. I don't like this. In the payment service, we still have this method that awaits for this like side effect method. And so now I guess this is worse because now you don't even know that the side effect is happening because it's removed the side effect completely. I don't know if this is better or worse, but it is something worth keeping in mind. And instead it defaults to nothing. Also, it has these issues with concurrency that I found where if I like if I make a test block concurrent and I do this like if I write this code in a specific way that I haven't fully figured out why, maybe it's the same problem with like the recursive heap thing. It just fails for some unknown reason that I can't get my head around. And I think that's also a bug, probably because it's concurrency, but anyways, I digress. We can look at it later if you're that keen. Sorry, any questions? Yes. Yeah.
Maybe it's a private business code, but.
Oh, this repo?
Yeah. This
Yes.
And then outline in the README the real problems.
Yes.
I'm not sure if Jest is doing it better, but
Yeah.
I'll play it on the weekend.
Yeah.
And maybe I can do another commit in the branch and say, hey,
Yes, I would love that. Thank you so much.
really fantastic. The second one is I want to look at it as a developer.
Yes.
All the pain you're experiencing.
Yes.
However, how about Copilot? Did you try to
Ah.
to Copilot and then, you know, now I write unit tests, I ask Copilot to do most of.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if I was starting from scratch, I wouldn't do it this way.
That's
Um,
when you are.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult to change this way of working because it's so ingrained and it's everywhere. Like if you've been doing this for a while, it's everywhere in the code. And whenever you go and write a new test, what are you going to do? You're going to copy paste the thing that's already there. So I don't know if Copilot will help there. Probably, yeah.
When it was gonna be failed, you can ask it. Why am I tests failing?
You'll say it's okay, they're meant to fail.
Yeah, and the last question is like, from the business side, we look at this as a product, there's also Vitest.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, when it goes to production, are you happy that all of this test, does it do the job? Like you don't have a need to change
Oh.
Vitest for something else, but I mean, it does the job. I know it's hard to do it, but does it do the job?
It does the job until like 3 months down the line, you have this really weird bug that is caused by side effects and you can't figure out why, and your test can't tell you why because your tests have caused these side effects to happen. That's my understanding. Yeah. Yeah. Let me finish off.
Thank you.
No, thank you. So cool. So at this point, I hope you kind of feel like this, where it's like, okay, shit, all these methods, they're terrible. What do I use? And I have a solution. I don't know if this is the best solution. There's probably other ways of doing it. At a concept though, what we want to do is we want to implement some way of mocking out these objects without having these side effects happen. So what does that look like? Well, what I found is this library called Vitest mock extended. There's also jest mock extended. That was the original, and Vitest mock extended is like the Vitest version of that. And it has a couple methods. One of them is mock deep. And the way that mock deep works is that you give it the type of the object that you want to mock. And it will return you, like Mockito and like Java style, and a very plain and simple object that has recursively all of its methods and etc. mocked. And more so, you can do this thing where you can tell it every time a method that hasn't been mocked has been called on this object, don't like go back to the real one or don't give me nothing, just throw an error, right? And what this means is now we can use it in all of our tests, like payment service test, which had that issue before. And we can run it and now it will fail because that, what was it? Check fraudulent payments function hasn't been mocked and therefore it will throw an error. That being said, it's not very nice. It just throws an error. I haven't been able to find a way to tell you what error, like what method wasn't mocked. But you know, it's open source, so come help me out. So that's the approach that I've landed on right now, which is you can still use Vitest for running all your tests, but maybe don't use it for mocks and instead look at using dependency injection and having a clean and simple, stupid way of like taking these objects and just passing them in. Am I missing anything? Cool. And helpers can be used, right? Like if you don't like this thing up here, you can just write a helper, which is just like the generic mock function that exists everywhere that does this for you and has another bunch of niceness. And this just works out of the box. Okay. Any questions? Cool. So conclusion, using monkey patching from vi.mock and vi.spyon and everything else can be dangerous. I'm not telling you not to use it, but you know, if you're not aware of what it does and all the complex things it does, at some point you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. At least for me, tests are safest when they're just kept really stupid simple and you don't have to learn all of these things, right? If I can have just a very simple construct of being like, here's my mock method and here's what I do with it, that's great. I can easily follow it through the code. I don't have to like figure out what Vi is doing before the code even runs. You can write your code to allow for injection of dependencies that can be mocked objects instead. And yeah, set up your mocked objects to fail when called unexpectedly, so that you can catch these problems with side effects. Cool. If you want some links, the QR code will link you to the repo where all of this is. I'll update it more over time. I'm Evan Kohilas. You can email me at evan@cxmpl.com. No Human Errors is my personal website where I'm trying to mitigate all human errors in programming, because having these problems in code is not great, right? How do we improve our developer experience? There's the URL for the repo if you need it, and we're hiring. If you're going to come work with me, the repo should have a URL to the jobs leaver site, or you can go jobs.leaver.co/cxmpl or cxmpl.com. Cool. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know.
That was amazing, Evan.
Thank you.
And I really love the way the audience was interacting with you and getting me questions all the way through. Have we got any more questions now that are remaining unanswered? You had a great time on the way through.
Yeah. Are there any questions? You did great asking questions throughout. Best audience, actually. Yeah, so good. I won't judge if you don't have questions. You asked so many.
We're good?
Oh, sorry. There is one question. How do I feel about dependency injection in general? Yeah, that's a good question. Because JavaScript doesn't force you to do it, how do you deal with that? I asked myself this question for a long time, and I was like, if you don't use dependency injection as a pattern, how do you test instead? And after many weeks, I was like, it's not possible. Like, I would Google everything. I'm like, does this other thing exist? Does this other pattern exist? My understanding is no, unless you like are very safe about the way you do this with like monkey patching. I've certainly learned that I like dependency injection now, even though it is a bit messy and you know, you need some things around it to make it easier. But if you care about the safety of your code, like we do as a bank, then that's important. Yeah.
Can I talk to you about dependency injection? I have a way.
Okay. After? Okay. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Are there any frameworks that make dependency injection easier in JavaScript? There are a couple. There's like Nest.js. T-Syringe. That's new to me. Nest, I think. Yeah. There's also another thing that we're experimenting with, and it's like using the async local context to create a context and pull it out at any point, and you inject things into that. We haven't fully like dived into it, but when we do, maybe I'll come back. Yeah, it's very interesting. But yes, I think that's all for questions. Thank you very much.
Yep. Can we give out a big round of applause, please?